Afternoon, everybody. Little by little, people are joining us. I want to welcome you all on behalf of the Contemplative Studies Initiative and Contemplative Studies Concentration at Brown. I want to thank all of you for coming, and I want to give particular thanks to my colleagues Ann Hireman-Hart and Srinivas Reddy for their invaluable work in working with me to create this series. And special welcome and thanks to our guest commentators today, Professor Rhonda Magee from University of San Francisco Law School and Professor Mahalingam from the University of Michigan. Normally at this point, I would speak a bit about what contemplative studies is. But today the situation is a little bit different, so I'm going to skip my normal introduction and ask people, if you're interested, to please visit our website to find out more about the innovative concentration and program that we've established. We strongly believe in doing so that the development of what we call contemplative intelligence, the practical knowledge of how to do contemplative practices, along with the understanding of the various cultural, scientific, ethical, and political contexts through which these practices can be understood, is the basis for the most effective forms of social justice activism. And we hope that our program today will be a small step in the major struggle to confront systemic racism in our country that recent events have once again made us painfully aware. But before doing that today, there are some rather special circumstances. We wish to take a few minutes to remember our dear friend and colleague in the struggle, Professor Oliver Hill, who shortly after he joined us 2 weeks ago for our first program in the series, suddenly passed away at his home in Richmond. He was 70 years old. Oliver was, well, he was a special human being, the son of a famous NAACP lawyer who helped win the Brown versus Board of Education case in 1954. Oliver followed his own path to become a leading cognitive psychologist, but also a contemplative with a deep contemplative practice in Siddha Yoga. And a model for many of us who believe that contemplation and contemplative practice is the basis for genuine social change. So I'm going to ask, I've asked a few people to join us to speak about Oliver. And the first person I'd like to recognize is Dean Carolyn Jacobs. So Carolyn, could you say a few words?
First, I have to unmute myself. Okay. I am just very grateful to you, Hal, for asking me this, as it was for all of us, quite a shock after, especially having spent the time with Oliver and having this wonderful preparation for the discussion and this wonderful discussion. I think both of us were clear in our reflection on the last 3 years since our talks, what we wanted to say about the future and where we saw things. The exchange that we had regarding the time, I was ever aware of Oliver's usual generous spirit, his presence as an African-American man, a contemplative, a scholar, a researcher, an educator, and a gentle colleague. He comes together for me with what we often say is the best of a Renaissance person, if you will, who can pull together all of those domains and move deeply out of a strong sense of his own identity as a contemplative African-American man. His ability to engage ideas as he approached the world with self-inquiry and studentship, as he says, where he sees the capacity to learn from everyone with an openness that demonstrated that which he valued, to continually focus on the underlying teachings of contemplative practice, and to be anchored in a stationary space inside of oneself, and to fully engage the world with the activism and the kind of common sharing in humanity that was so necessary. He reflected a sense of shared humanity while celebrating the uniqueness of others. Oliver was concerned about developing the depths of consciousness beyond thinking, to engage the world of meditation from a place of love and compassion. His meditation on June 2nd left us moving from sitting with an awareness of our bodies to connecting to the web of relationships, expanding back in time to our common ancestry. I am grateful for knowing Oliver and knowing that his presence and contributions will be with us forever, calling us to deep practice, to deep social action engagement, to rigorous scholarship, to love, and to compassion. Thank you, Oliver.
Thank you, Carolyn. Thank you. I'd also like to ask Lynn Corbell, who practiced in the City Yoga tradition with Oliver for many years, to say a few words. Lynn is a professor of practice in our recently established Mindfulness Center and is a very skilled, experienced MBSR teacher. Lynn?
Thank you, Hal. I wasn't quite prepared for this, but I just can't tell you how joyful it was to be with Oliver 2 weeks ago. And the summer of 2018, when I was coming to Brown, I was in a City Yoga teacher training actually with Oliver. And that through Oliver, I learned of his friendship with you, Hal. And I felt like before I even arrived at Brown, there was this commingling of my root spiritual tradition, my root practice, and what was happening at Brown. And I felt like Oliver was a kind of ambassador for this connection to happen. My experience, as Carolyn mentioned, of Oliver is this an amazing capacity to bring together so many threads of what it means to be human, and to work with a keen intellect and weave together disparate ideas, things that seem like, how could these 2 things or 10 things be in the same room? And not only did Oliver bring them together, but that it made sense, that there was some deeper meaning in how the possibilities of what could happen. So I just have this deep well of gratitude that I got to be with Oliver and the group a few weeks ago, and deeply aware of what we'll all miss in his presence and beauty, really. So thank you.
Thank you, Lynn. Rhonda, would you like to say a few words? You have to unmute yourself.
Okay. Can everyone hear me now? Okay. Yeah, thank you so very much, all of you, for being here and for these kind, beautiful reminders of the life force of Oliver Hill Jr. I won't say a whole lot. I'm really grateful I had the opportunity to get to know Oliver as a co-journeyer on the board of the Center for Contemplative Mind and Society, and the very last time that I believe I was with Oliver, we were presenting together at a conference sponsored by Mind and Life on a panel on the themes that we're covering here. And, you know, I just want to name that in addition to him being such a beautiful scholar, human being, leader in this field, embodiment of the contemplative way of being for justice. You know, he was just such a you know, genuinely caring soul. I remember he was working to provide mentoring to a young man in his family. You know, a young man in the family who was going through some difficulty, who had moved in to live with Oliver and his wife at that time. So just knowing that the ways that he cared and took care were vast. And I feel that now that he is part of our ancestors, it's a great honor to continue in some way, some small way, to walk in the path he helped to forge.
Thank you, Rhonda. And Ram, I know you'd like to say a few words about Oliver as well.
Thank you, everyone, for being here. I have a special connection to Oliver because he got his PhD from my department. So he was always fond of me whenever we met few times. He always big smile, a big hug. So a lot of people knew about his work on mindfulness, but he's also a very renowned cognitive psychologist. He did some very fascinating work on assessment, cognitive orientation, and he got a huge grant to really use how to use mindfulness practices to really narrow the gap in math achievement. How to use mindful awareness to fight with the stereotype threat. So it's really very much into cutting edge, how to use this knowledge to talk about disparities, racial disparities. So he's not only a wonderful human being and practicing mindfulness practitioner, but he's also applied it and made some deep contribution to the field, both basic research as well as applied research towards in his career, which is quite amazing. So he had such a breadth, as Carolyn said. He's a Renaissance man in many ways, and I always felt very connected, and he was quite warm. And he also worked in the prison mindfulness project too. So, you know, people knew about him, and he also started the health psychology program in his department when he became a chair, and that's one of the most successful program. It made a huge difference in the university, and so his contribution beyond the mindfulness is pretty huge in the field. I just want to make sure that that side of Oliver is recognized. And as Rhonda said, he's our ancestor, both as intellectual lineage as well as the spiritual lineage. I want to make sure that we recognize both. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Ram. And just in closing, I'd like to add another probably not very well-known fact about Oliver, and that is I want to thank the Center for Contemplative Mind and Society for first bringing us together at one of the Fetzer conferences and at subsequent conferences. And it turns out that Oliver and I were born in the same year and grew up watching the same television programs and had a fondness for TV Westerns, which dominated the scene in the 1950s. And it turns out that we knew the jingles for most of the Western programs and sang them together at the Fetzer Institute, driving his wife Renee up a wall. She was not pleased with this aspect of our relationship. He was a man with a huge, generous heart, and to memorialize him just a little bit from our perspective, we are setting up a special Oliver Hill, a contemplative practice scholarship to be given to African American students and other students of color at Brown to support them going on contemplative practice workshops, retreats, and conferences. So we will post something on our website within the next week or two about the fund, and encourage you to make any small donations you're able to facilitate the development of the fund. I would, let's see, talk about the structure a bit. today. So as we're going to turn things over in a minute to our moderator today, Professor Andre Willis from the Department of Religious Studies, my colleague and friend there. We ask you as Professor Magee and Professor Mahalingam will be having some introductory comments, to please, if you have questions, put them in the chat, and Ann Hart and I will moderate the chat and recognize people to ask their questions, just as we did 2 weeks ago. So without further delay, let me welcome my friend and colleague, Professor Andre Willis, to take over.
Hey, thanks, Hal, and glad to see everybody. Just want to say two things very quickly before I head to Rhonda's introduction, if I can pull it up somehow. One, it's just nice to be in community today, and I want to extend my gratitude to Hal Roth and the Contemplative Studies program, the wonderful work of Ann and Hal, to really want to pull something together in the midst of crisis. You know, I think, Hal and Ann sent me an email which acknowledged not only my own personal suffering as an African-American, but, paid a kind of tribute to, all the struggles that were going on with COVID, and said, hey, we're trying to pull together some programming, not only to bring people together, but demonstrate how our tradition and some of our insights might speak to the contemporary conflicts around race and justice and policing and politics, right? And I want to just take a second to honor that move, not only from Hal, my brother, and my colleague, who has been working tirelessly in the contemplative strand for so many years, right? But also to say to all of you who've shown up today to hear our speakers, thank you, because just being together in community, it does mean something. And it has a special meaning for me today, not because I knew Oliver Hill. I actually got to know him through watching the first video that this program posted in my preparations for this event. But what I can say is I knew of his father, right? And it was good to see him, a brother, somebody I could relate to, right, doing his thing in this particular discipline, right? A discipline which was important to me. And I just want to say, just to honor him, I opened my father's funeral a few years ago by using some wisdom that I've accumulated from this tradition, which was, all rising eventually falls, accumulation ends in dispersal, and every meeting ends in a parting. We know then all life ends in death. So we then accept the natural balance of the universe as we mourn and as we grieve for not only Oliver and his family, but for the world that has now lost such a beautiful soul and a spirit. So I don't want to go too long, because we got real people here to do what they do. And I'm going to start by introducing the first one, and that's Rhonda Magee. So Rhonda Magee is a professor of law. I'm just going to give you a very brief intro. Is a professor of law at the University of San Francisco. She's the author of The Inner Work of Racial Justice, Healing Ourselves and Transforming Our Communities Through Mindfulness, which is a 2019 text, came out last year, that I've been working through. She's also the author of numerous articles, including The Way of Color Insight, Understanding Race and Law Effectively Using Mindfulness-Based Color Insight Practices. That's from 2016. Then she has a piece in 2017, Teaching Mindfulness with Mindfulness of Diversity. And then Community Engaged Mindfulness and Social Justice and Inquiry and Call to Action, again, 2017. These are just a few that I've pulled from the bio. She's an internationally renowned and recognized thought and practice leader focused on integrating mindfulness into higher ed, law, and social change work. And her thoughts seem, as I've looked at them recently, they seem to pull from a variety of intellectual worlds, namely legal history and legal thought, but she's also weaving poetry, storytelling, and all sorts of analysis and practices into trying to inspire us for changing how we think, changing how we act, and transforming how we live together in community as the world so rapidly shifts. You can read more about her, as I did, on RhondaVMagee.com. So Rhonda, welcome. Thank you for being here. And I was glad to meet you yesterday and eager to hear your thoughts today.
Brother Andre, Brother Hal, Brother Ram, and brothers and sisters, all of you. I'm so very honored and grateful just to be here. I really appreciated Professor Willis's, Andre's amplification of the value of community at this time. I feel that really strongly. And also want to recognize the work of Anne and others somewhat behind the scene, right? Because these communities don't just happen. This work doesn't just happen. There are so many strands of engaged, intentional, purposeful effort and work behind, these gatherings that seem otherwise to be somewhat, effortless. So I just want to thank, obviously, this entire beautiful contemplative practice community that Hal and Anne and others have so skillfully and with dedication and commitment cultivated over the years. It is already changing academia, changing the landscape of the possible around bringing these practices into higher education. It has had such an impact on us, and its legacy will be, it's untold. We will never know entirely just what this has wrought in the world. So I just want to honor how it is that we come to be together through this auspicious work of Brown's Center for Contemplative Science, Pedagogy, Practice, Teaching and Learning, and Study. And so, yeah, I just want to say a few words about how I am entering into this moment right now. Yes, I was honored to be able to present a talk as part of the Contemplative Studies lecture series on mindfulness, science, and society at Brown some years ago. And I focused in my talk on contemplative pedagogy, teaching and learning for social justice. So, been in this storm for so long, as I say, been in this work for a very long time. Nothing, nothing new here. Not just waking up to anything. And also, so kind of grateful in a kind of a bittersweet way that we have been experiencing a new, what's the word? Almost like a seismic shift in waking up in a different way to the ongoing work of reckoning with our history as it shows up every day in our lives. In particular, the history around white supremacy and racism. But not only that history, right? We've been going through Me Too, LGBTQ plus rights movement. We are reckoning with awareness around the environment and climate and the way in which we are suffering together individually and collectively as a result of so many, historical and deeply ingrained patterns of forgetting our connection to the natural world, of systematically minimizing, exploiting, taking advantage of this beautiful, what we call the environment, but with contemplative practice, we realize we're always already a part of that as well. not two, not separate in a certain sense. So, you know, in the talk that I gave, I kind of really laid out how it is that teaching about, you know, the talk was geared toward really looking at the challenges of teaching about these issues of social justice in a, you know, traditional setting, where of course we're coming together from our radically different positions, experiences, histories, degrees of awareness, right? So that radical diversity and differentiation that's always already present whenever we get together, and it's present right here, right? We're sort of sometimes given to forget how radically, like what a beautiful challenge it is to come together. We feel like we have the same language, so we're sort of, you know, of course we can understand each other. Not necessarily. You know, every one of us has a particular way in which we're using words, has a particular whole web of narratives by which we try and understand the world. And so any concept, any thought is being received from a very unique vantage point. And so it's just always a challenge to come together. And that's even, you know, again, when we're talking about something that's relatively uncontroversial. But if we're talking about issues of social injustice, in particular, if we're talking about the legacies of white supremacy, a term or a phrase that we've only just once again began being a little bit more comfortable naming as what we're up against. How many of you are aware that there's been a shift in receptivity to saying what we're dealing with is the legacy of white supremacy in our midst, right? Literally just probably a year ago. Even in the wake of the Charlottesville, even in the wake of white nationalism being on the rise, the last few years there's been a slow uptick, like a kind of simmer, a simmering, I would say kind of move in the direction of waking up to how it is that these practices, systems, that are what it is that we're sort of pointing toward when we use the phrase white supremacy in our history, right? We've just been witnessing over the years a slow uptick in the understanding or the kind of turning toward, with some questioning, some curiosity, but also predictable defensiveness, predictable cognitive dissonance, and all of the kind of emotional reactivity and fragilities that come up with all of that. But we've been feeling our way into a bigger conversation, a more resilient, sort of social and intellectual space for working with these legacies. And then, boom, in the midst of a pandemic, of the likes of which I could never have predicted a few years ago when giving that talk. Okay? In the midst of a pandemic, which has rendered all of us simultaneously more physically vulnerable to a threat we're just trying to, you know, constantly get our head around, like think we understand it, and some new level of what's going on is coming up. We're all more physically vulnerable. We're all more radically aware of our interconnectedness, right? What happens in Wuhan, turns out, is related to what happens in San Francisco, in Newton, Massachusetts, in Michigan, wherever we are. Radical interdependence and interconnectedness is on the mind, on the brain, along with that radical vulnerability. So much is happening to kind of, I would say, part of the context within which George Floyd's lynching, frankly, I'm just going to use that phrase because it's the only phrase that really seems appropriate to me when I look at what happened to him. happened on Memorial Day this year in a way that we all saw and have been experiencing, witnessing in some ways. Whether we've seen all of the video, whether we've seen the different, all the different post-video comments and additional information, transcripts about what the broad encounter was, whether we've seen all of those details or not, we're all kind of in this post-George Floyd moment of a different level of awakening, right? And so I mentioned the broader context because I think without the broader context, we probably wouldn't be having the same level of awakening that we are having. There's some way I don't think we can fully explain right now. We're still too close up on it to really render it a full accounting. But we know something is different in this moment about having to do with our willingness to kind of at least be present to the reality that racism is still real, white supremacy is a part of our lives, and we have to find more profound ways to deal with these things. So,
Rhonda, you muted yourself.
Sorry, there we go. So yeah, I've been thinking about these things for a while. My book came out last year, and in it, I describe a lot of what is still present in my heart around the intersection between racial justice and contemplative practice and pedagogy. But I think it's, I really am feeling even more the call to kind of underscore that we really, really have to lean into a different way of addressing these issues if we're going to mend, heal, transform the world, heal ourselves as we go. Oliver was so beautifully, I think, concerned about how traditional social justice work, for example, seems to, maybe in too many instances, misapprehend the call for us to remake what it means for all of us to be human, right? Not only to kind of redress the wrongs. Certainly we don't just want to kind of replace those oppressive systems with differently racialized or people who look different, right? Who run the same systems. The contemplative approach to this work is to say, we're trying to transform it in a way that heals us all, reckoning with the particularities, right, of the suffering of differently vulnerable communities and in bodies, yes, but in service of something liberatory, something healing, what I'm calling in my work these days, a profound coming home. Coming home together to this planet that we, have abandoned too often, to each other, our brothers and sisters in one human family that we have not recognized as we should. So I don't want to take too much more time because we wanted to kind of be mindful of that as we go. Just wanted to just touch into how I'm holding this. I'm holding it as a, I feel like we're in a profound moment, a moment that is more profound than I can name right now, where I feel very called still to kind of center on listening for the deep teachings of this time. The language has to change. The energy of it has to change. But at the core of it for me is a deepening insight about our common predicament as human beings, disconnected from a planet that will survive without us, and disconnected from each other in the work. So if we can lean into this contemplative social justice work as a support for healing ourselves, healing the separations that keep us feeling threatened by the call to be in each other's deep presence, then I think this is a way that gives me hope gives me hope that we will, through this difficult trial, this trial of difficulty beyond words right now, through this, if we can get through this, I'm trusting and hoping that we can get through it in a way that can deeply reconnect us to the source of our well-being and healing on this planet together. So thank you.
Thank you, Sister Rhonda. We really appreciate those remarks, and I look forward to going back into those with some questions. And a reminder, housekeeping, just a reminder for everyone to submit your questions through the, is it a chat, Hal? Is that what it is?
Yeah, it's the chat at the bottom of your page, right in the dead center of the bottom.
I'm not showing that on mine, but I got a funky setup over here. But anyway, submit your questions through the chat, and then after Ram's talk, I'll start off with a few questions if there's space for that, and then we'll go directly to the questions from the folks who are gathered. So we want this to be about dialogue and connection. That is, the gathering is about a kind of critical discourse and the facilitation of ideas that come through all of us. So it's not just about Ron, it's not just about Ram, it's about a collective inquiry. And we want to stress that. But let me jump. Hal, is there any other housekeeping I need to do though, man?
Nope.
Okay, so let me jump over to Ram. I'm gonna give a brief introduction. Ram Mahalingam is a professor at University of Michigan. He's a cultural psychologist, award-winning researcher, inspiring teacher, mentor, artist, and a filmmaker who's worked in a variety of cultural contexts for more than 20 years. He's also co-edited several texts, including, I'm just mentioning two here, a multicultural curriculum, New Directions for Social Theory, that's Social Theory, Practice, and Policy in 2013, Cultural Psychology of Immigrants in 2006. He's won several awards for research, too many to mention, awards for teaching, awards for mentoring. He's currently directing the Barger Leadership Institute. And I guess he's the Barger Leadership Institute professor in the psychology department at University of Michigan over in Ann Arbor. Now his current research, and you can read more about him on the website of the Mindful Dignity Lab, but his research now is about developing a caring and compassionate workplace that treats workers with dignity. He's committed to developing leaders who are passionate about dignity with a mindful commitment to promoting workplace well-being. His research examines dignity in, very quickly, 3 organizational kind of contexts. 1, he takes on janitors and cleaning. 2, he takes on healthcare settings. And 3, he takes on gender and technology in light of gender, and works through questions of dignity in that context. So Ram, we welcome you. Glad to have you, brother. We look forward to your comments.
Thank you very much. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Yes, thank you. Thanks for inviting me, Hal. And thanks, Anne, for coordinating all these things. And also last time when I was there, about 3 years ago, 4 years ago, I forgot how long ago. When Hal called me, so I was thinking where I was that time and where I am now. So I thought I would just really kind of move from where I was to where I am now and talk about that, or the shifts in my thinking, and also the current COVID and all the Black Lives Matter, all the racism and police brutality. So all those things are part of coming from India. Augusto Boal, who did the work on Theater of the Oppressed, he came and did a workshop for the faculty members at Michigan 15 years ago. So he did always ask open with one exercise we do, which I've done Augusto Boal, Theater of the Oppressed in India a long time. So I knew I was his assistant that day. He asked, how many people are afraid of police in the workshop? All people of color and African-American retired students raised their hands. All the white people were looking at us. Why you are afraid of police? Then that became the intervention, what police means to us and what our experience was. So he really started the whole workshop on that. So I always tell my students how, you have a different sense of what police is and how it is. And it came through this time. So what I'm going to do is, I'm so honored to be with Rhonda, and who has been a sister and a fellow traveler, and who also inspired me to do what I'm doing now, to really connect. And she said a lot of these stages. Being an academic, a psychologist, I'm going to use the PowerPoint slide quickly, walk you through a few things so that it's also, I keep my time in space. So quickly bear with me, and I'm going to share the slides now. Let me see, share the screen. Share. Okay. Can everybody see the screen?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay. So I'm just revisiting what it means. So when I came last time, give a talk as part of the series, and I didn't see Rhonda because Rhonda was, I think Rhonda gave the talk before me, if I remember right, a few months ago. Then I followed her talk. So I'm just following her now. So she already set up things, what I need to do. Sister has done all the work. I'm just going to walk on that. So three key developments since this last time. So one is I really developed my mindful mindset. I also connected, I talked about dignity because my work on dignity came from my work on janitors. Now I'm doing it in 5 countries: India, US, South Korea, Japan, and France. So how cleaning work is always invisible, and how the invisibility and how they always have to always have to contest and try to get the dignity. So dignity is not given because they are doing dirty work. And from there I started, and not surprisingly, in all cultures, people of color or ethnic minorities do the cleaning. Bulk of the cleaning is done by them, right? Then I developed the notion of dignity as an embodied praxis, that is, you intervene. So if you are going to be mindful, for me, the litmus test for if you're being mindful is how you treat other people with dignity. So I really used it as a way of making people ethically accountable. So using dignity to help people to be more accountable. So that's from my talk to now is I fully developed that particular argument. And that's what the paper published in 2019. And I also developed the notion of radical interdependence, which already Rhonda mentioned, drawing on Ambedkar, Baba Saheb Ambedkar, who is a Dalit scholar in India, who's in work. He really one of the earliest engaged Buddhist. So I really take this idea to look at why it is important for us at this moment, with with George Floyd and everything happened, how we should think about radical interdependence. So I really look at dignity as an embodied praxis. It's a constellation of processes by which we embody, recognize, intervene, preserve, and cherish the very core of what makes us human, right? So the idea is when you become mindful, that means you are awake, and you not only look at preserve your own dignity, what I call the personal dignity. We also look at the intersubjective, other person's dignity. And you're also accountable to the dignity around you, what I call the processual dignity. So you need to really look at dignity at 3 levels. I mean, there is a whole different literature on dignity come from philosophy. I'm not going to get into this. Legal scholars have talked about human rights and dignity, and very amazing work on nursing literature, because dignity is very important for the nursing. That's what led to me my healthcare setting, where I look at dignity and mindfulness, right? So what makes us human, and so make sure that dignity is in the way how you carry ourselves. So to really give you the frameworks, and many of you would have seen the my talk, or so this mindful mindset has 7 features. So it's an integration of my interest in mindfulness and also my work on social justice. It's a kind of integration of this. So it has 7 features: compassion, sympathetic joy, situated intersectional awareness, where we talked about how our identities are also situated, and also has privileges and disadvantages, and idea of negative capability, because there are times we are so uncomfortable about our own prejudices, because we are marinating our mind in some of our stereotypes and prejudices. And whenever we are uncomfortable, we tend to suppress it. We don't engage with it. So negative capability is the notion developed by Keats. His idea that you stay with something uncomfortable. That's what a proper way of engaging with something uncomfortable. So it's a good artist, a painter will do this, or an actor will do that. So if I'm going to play Robin Hood, it's always fun to do Robin Hood. But if I'm going to play Joker, it takes a lot more energy, and bring compassion to the role to perform it at the best level. Cultural humility, how we can treat other people with respect, what we can learn from them. Wonder, as I call wonder as a transformative passion. So wonder is not only something you are at art, but you're also looking at something. If I wonder why my women colleagues are making less money than me, that means I need to do something about it. So wonder is also leads to some transformation. It's important to really think of it as a transformative passion. And generosity, how so many people's generosities are involved in making up who we are. And that leads to three kinds of interconnectedness: intersectional, which is how we connect to other people; intersectional, how you connect your own emotions and feelings at this; and ecological, all the social justice and the environmental justice we talked about. And dignity becomes the core of this. So personal, intersubjective, and three aspects of dignity. So I've tested these models. I've been using the model to teach. I developed experiential learning programs using the model. By the end of the course, students develop a dignity commitment, how they're going to take these three ideas and think of an organization context or a familial context, a social context, in which how they make a personal commitment to really develop a vision, developing a vision for personal dignity, intersubjective and processual, and how they're going to use the mindfulness framework to really use it to adapt it, so work with it. So then I support them throughout the semester to really visualize that and to realize that. So that's what we do. So the radical interdependence notion is the one I just finished a paper, which is looking at Ambedkar's work. He really talks about radical interdependence because caste system is an interdependent system, but hierarchical. So each caste depends on other, but there is a hierarchical system. So he questioned that, being a pioneering a scholar who went to Columbia, studied with John Dewey. He got his PhD at Columbia, went back to India, wrote the Constitution. He led the team who wrote the Constitution. He's one of the remarkable scholar who also converted to Buddhism with 100,000 people on 1956. That's the largest conversion in the history of the world. And one day, 100,000 people convert, become Buddhist. And he really talked about a society where kinship is formed based not on birth, but based on compassion and human dignity, because our lives are interdependent. So radical interdependence call for us to recognize this predicament, right? So we have to really forcefully awaken ourselves how to engage with this. So that's really an important notion. We have been using this framework to study janitors who work in the mall. So most of the time, these women are invisible, and how the interdependence really helps them to really regain the dignity, and how they can preserve the dignity in a context that doesn't give them automatically. So that's the work we are doing. So coming back to this question, what we're thinking at this point is one of the issues is invisibility of suffering. People actually don't pay attention. When George Floyd is saying I can't breathe, that suffering is not visible, and that testimonial injustice, that's what Fricker calls epistemic injustice. He calls that is, people don't believe because the hearer doesn't think credibility. They don't really think that claim is not credible because he's African American. So that's really the gaslighting part of it, right? That's really how it is, and how we don't recognize the humanity of people, African Americans in the U.S. and the white supremacy, how all these things become blinders. So really prevent us to fully connect to the present, fully connect to the other person, fully connect to the other issues that are important to us. And the same issues are going on in the US, in India, Dalits and modern slavery movement, which is looking at all the suffering of workers down the line in the supply chain and how it's affecting them. So we are looking at these questions. Then the COVID epidemics, how the idea that COVID epidemics really force us to think about how we are interconnected. In some sense, the connection also make it possible through Zoom and this. Now we are connected as a community. We're engaging with it. There are possibilities, but at the same time, we are thinking everybody is not alone anymore. The whole world is interconnected, and how we need to think about it. So I think the notion of epistemic injustice is very important for us to think about. Fricker wrote about it. She's Miranda Fricker, who is a philosopher. She really talks about testimonial injustice, and when people don't trust your testimony because you are less than a human, and that leads to a credibility issue. Then people don't pay attention to your suffering. Then that means we are not engaging or recognizing the dignity of the other person, especially when people are different racially or LGBT or identity-wise or immigrants, any other thing. So racism is such an important issue we are encountering because we historically we haven't made an effort to really look at the dignity of the human being and the suffering of the African Americans. That has been written only by them. That means it has been also not paid given due credence, and the dignity of the human being is not respected there. So mindfulness, for me, means you cultivate an awareness which leads to the recognition and the dignity of the other human beings, and how we have to commit to that. And I think that's what being mindful means, not just meditation for me, right? So that's really the social justice part is the litmus test. If you are mindful, are you doing this? So dignity becomes a thermometer for me to be mindful. That's how I see it. Dignity is a thermometer, mindfulness thermometer for me. That's how I teach my students. So I think that's the only way. We have to challenge ourselves, continuously work, transform ourselves to reconfirm and recommit to change, and also accept our own compliance, our own role, our own prejudices, and how it actually we are part of this problem, and also so that we can work with them with compassion. So I think that's really the one important way to really think about, rethink this. So from the 3 years ago, I talked about it. I actually I further developed the idea, the connection between mindfulness and dignity and the invisibility, and also to the idea of radical interdependence. I think this is the most important time. So we have to really engage. We have to really think about, recommit ourselves to this notion. And I think mindfulness has a lot to offer, but we also really need to really bring dignity and social justice. Without that, it's an incomplete project. Mindfulness is an incomplete project for me. So dignity makes it complete. And dignity is the thermometer. We should assess ourselves, not how long I can meditate, how good I'm a meditator. All those things are important, but the basic point is, how do you treat other people? And I think that's the question. Black Lives Matters. Everything really brings back to the same question. This is something very basic in our face. We have to do it. We cannot just turn our eyes down. Just say they are not invisible. It's not my problem. That's not an issue. So mindfulness is about connecting with people and work towards a culture of dignity, commit to ourselves to do that transformation at the personal level, at the intersubjective, and at the processual level. And I think that has been from Martin Luther King, from Ambedkar, everybody has been telling this. And I think it's time for us to really seriously take that mindfulness and mindfulness challenge, expand its limits, so that it's not an incomplete project. It has something meaningful to us for this time. This is the hour for us to do it. And it's a challenge. We can do it. And I hope we can do it. Thank you. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, Ram.
Appreciate that, Ram.
Okay.
A lot there. We're going to get to unpack for both thinkers. I'm going to start with Rhonda and just throw a question to my sister first. And I'm an outsider to the whole field and to the tradition in many ways, an insider in terms of our heart connection. But let me just say this, though. First, Rhonda, I hope, and my questions will be basic, so maybe that'll be a way to kick off into the more specific questions that I see in the chat now. So I guess this, Rhonda, when I read your material and listen to your lecture, looked at the Color Insight and article and then your book, I get a sense that you and I mean, you're from Kinston, North Carolina, but I feel like you and I are kind of kin folk, right? Yet, but I feel like if we were to talk about how racism and white supremacy and the traumas of that, impacted us, we would largely be able to talk about how it looks from the inside, right, in ways that are very similar. Yet and I think also the kind of spiritual first aid that, you want to offer is I'm fully on board with it. However, the distinction in my commitment to kind of Afro-Protestant traditions, right, that want to come at these questions of sustaining Black communities in a particular kind of way, are distinct in certain ways from your commitment to mindfulness and contemplative traditions. So what's really different about what we're doing? And why did you come out of, I think, you didn't talk much about this, but my sense was you came out of a Protestant tradition, a Black Protestant tradition, and turned to this. What did that give you that wasn't in the tradition I'm so committed to holding on to?
Wow, listen to my brother. This can be a big question. Woo! I love it. So I won't be able to fully answer this except to say, you know, I didn't say what I hold, which is a kind of, you know, I fully feel that whatever I call mindfulness and contemplative practice and this sort of spiritual first aid, I love that phrase, whatever it is deeply infused with my own experience of that kind of prophetic Christian upbringing, which was, again, embedded in a Black context in North Carolina in the late 60s, early 70s, where I kind of marinated in a lived interpretation of the kind of hopeful struggle, if you will, that was, you know, alive in my family's experience in that place. Working class at best, right? You know, I mean, there was not always a lot of enough resources. And there was that deep context of, you know, being in a place where this thing we're talking about, where white supremacy as a legacy was just literally part of all of the air that we were breathing and the water we were drinking. So so I guess certainly the way in which I inherited a kind of Christian faith, it was very much about love and struggle. And so when I come to mindfulness and come to interpretations of Buddhist teaching and philosophy, as I'm talking about it here, it is, I think, very much infused with a certain kind of message around loving interrelationship that is an interpretation of the particular Christian stories and teachings that I grew up with. So I feel like they're in there. And there's a way in which, for me, Buddhism and the call to really see clearly how the mind works and the temptation of getting attached, creating a strong sense of ego, the temptation of resisting truth as it might be showing up in our lives, or staying in a fog of unknowing, the three poisons, so to speak. There was a certain kind of clarity in that kind of framework for seeing how we get stuck and how we move away from, you know, the call to living, being a living example of Christ's message, or of, you know, that deep spiritual connection that I think we can experience. So I think, I mean, in a nutshell, that's sort of why I tend to use the language of the teachings of Buddhism. But actually, I kind of feel like we're moving toward wanting to not have to come through we all come through some door, but I'm hoping we're trying to find ways to come into the same room. And that's, I think, a part of the challenge. You know, we're formed in these, you know, my tradition versus your tradition, et cetera, et cetera. And yes, that's going to be a part of our work. So to me, it's like both and, like, okay, recognize and honor our traditions, but what's the common thread? And that's why I'm here. Thank you.
Okay, appreciate that. Now I see these 4 questions on the chat, but I'm going to be able to throw this out to Ram real quick just to honor your work, and then we'll turn to Janet. Now, how should I read Janet's question or let Janet read her own question?
We'll let Janet read her own question, but also just tell us where you're coming from, physically, and just who you are.
All right, well, Janet, we'll get to that after I pose this question to Brother Ram here. So Ram, I mean, I really thought I'm moved by your emphasis on not only dignity, but the way to take mindfulness as to separate it, to get some space between this notion of mindfulness as an introspective kind of modality, right? You want to say it's first about connection, because connection is what engenders the kind of dignity that you're after, that you want to say is a kind of the source of the true mindfulness in a way, right? So my question for you, and I appreciate all that, I'm on board with that and all the Rhonda stuff. But my question for you is this, man. Given the polarization in American culture right now, right? The polarization, like the crass sort of materialism, the divisions both in the culture that go beyond race and class and are just kind of beginning to get embedded with sort of political momentums that are always running opposite, right? How would you say a brother like me would practice such that I would be able to affirm Derek Chauvin, the dignity of Derek Chauvin's humanity, even in the face of his holding his knee on George Floyd's neck for those 9 minutes?
I think it's a most difficult time to really think about this question. And here, the issue is the dignity is seen as a zero-sum game. That is, by asserting the person who is putting his knee and asserting this person is saying by doing this, he is diminishing the other person's dignity or enhancing his dignity. And that is a problem. So any honor killing has this issue where dignity is zero-sum game. The person who is perpetrating, thinking that by diminishing, by unleashing the violence, he is restoring his dignity. And that is really the issue. And I think that's really a complex problem, but a lot of times people get into that binary that, okay, your dignity, by acknowledging your dignity, my dignity is going to be diminished. And we need to really change the whole practices. And Rhonda has been doing a lot of work with lawyers and police department too, by looking at the question. So I think that's really, by understanding this doesn't mean that we need to condone what he is doing. So that's really an important thing. But at the same time, how to really think about the dignity of the person so that the conversation is possible, so that we can continue to engage with this transformation. So there is a language which helps us to really think about, to unpack the zero-sum game. That's a misconception of how to think about dignity and how that leads to a set of practices that is embedded in the institutional practices, long history of racism, all kinds of, from slavery time, we have the history of how they've been, hunting down slaves, all kind of stuff. So I think that we need to unpack at that level. So we can understand it, but it doesn't mean that we need to condone that. And that's really one way I think about this. And this dignity has the dark side. This is a problem. There's one side of dignity. Dark side is you can think it as a zero-sum game. It happens all the time in honor killings in India, intercaste marriage. For a lower caste person marrying a Dalit marrying upper caste person, he gets killed because he is violating, he's injuring my caste dignity. That's how the oppressor always rationalize it. That's really how the discussion goes. So it's even, we argue we should not call it honor killing. That is, we should call it arrogant killing. So it's the arrogance of your identity. It's nothing to do with honor. There's no honor in this killing at all. So, and that's how we see it. Rhonda, you want to add anything?
Rhonda, you jumping in?
Really briefly, if I can.
Please.
So I wrote about dignity in 2002 and 3 as well. I mean, my work in law for a long time before I really started infusing contemplative practice was trying to help us reinvigorate the conversations about equality and so on and so forth. So dignity as a kind of a concept is always animated me too, and I love it. And just what you're pointing to, Ram, as human beings, we are very adept at taking whatever phrase.
You're right.
Right? So, and just, right? So I heard all the kinds, when I was presenting on dignity, well, I mean, dignity can equally well justify being for or against affirmative action, being for or against abortion, being for or against whatever.
Right.
So again, we just have to recognize, and to me, contemplative engagement is about naming how it is that the words are pointing towards something. They are not by themselves executing, right? So we're always, trying to, again, find the particular language that opens a doorway into some kind of, I don't know, again, at the end of the day, as human beings, we have nothing other than the languages we use. But if we bring mindfulness to the inability of words ever to fully capture what it is that we're trying to name, A. B, the fact that different words could be used to try to fully capture what it is that we're trying to name. C, as I think Brother Oliver Hill often talked about, it's really coming out of experience. And you talked about it, right? There's a way in which we're looking at how are we treating each other and exploring what we can in our bodies that can help us understand what it is that we're talking about. So we're always going to be doing some talking because we're academics and we're right, we're lawyers, right? No, but really, we're trying to get beneath the surface of the words through words. Does that make sense? So it's always a little bit of a paradox and a challenge. This is why we come together with practice as a support, because we just stay up here cognitively. You all know, this humankind can just argue each other into the grounds through the cognition. So there has to be a call to a practice. That's the part that I think is really the fundamental, distinctive offering that we're bringing here.
And quickly, Andre, one thing what we are so a lot of times the dignity research is more as an ethical discourse. A lot of people are discussing it, but we found finally we are able to find operationalized dignity, how dignity matters in workplace. We are looking at in France a sample of 25,000 people. So what we have found was having dignity in workplace, all three kinds of personal dignity, processual dignity, and intersubjective dignity is one of the best predictors of well-being. And people are happier at work, they have more meaning at work, and they are also they are come to work, they love to come to work. Absenteeism is low. So we are just working on a paper. So it's not just an ethical position, it's also an empirical position, which is important.
Just a brief comment. I won't recapitulate something I said 2 weeks ago, but our discussion brings this to mind, and not at all to diminish the evil of deeds that human beings do to each other, but it's really important. And I learned this from my friends, the Canadian Quakers that I worked with in a previous life, it seems. It's very important, and this is one of the principles of Gandhi's teaching, to separate the deed from the doer. You can hate the deed, but it's different to hate the doer. And if you can possibly avoid hating the doer, this also comes from a sense of the radical interdependence and transformational nature of all of our life experiences, and that we're never, ever any one thing, and it doesn't persist. The self is a constantly mutable, constantly changing and flowing stream. And that the Buddhist teaching of no self isn't that we don't have a self, we don't have a fixed and attached self. We have a flowing self, and that self can always change.
Yeah, thank you, brother. I remember, and you know what Oliver said to that same point, he said, yeah, and it's the practice which helps us sustain that very point you're making, as we go to go back to Rhonda. Anyway, so let's open it up. We have a marvelous set of at least 5 questions I can see in this chat room. So Janet Johnson, if you're still around and would like to say who you are and where you're coming from and tell us something about yourself before you posit this wonderful question, we would enjoy that.
Thank you very much. I'm a professor of English education at Rhode Island College, so very close to y'all, and I've attended some CMind lectures and events, so thank you so much for putting them on. I love everything that that you folks do. I also am the site director for the Rhode Island Writing Project, where we work with teachers on how to teach writing, and so we're working with kids in schools. So that's kind of where I'm coming from, as I'm coming from a educator standpoint.
Well, we're honored you're here, my friend.
Oh, thank you, thank you. So I think we kind of have already are teasing around my first question. Rhonda, you use the term healing the separation. And I get that it's about the deed, not the doer. I mean, Jesus says something similar. I think there's a lot of spiritual traditions that do that. But I think what I'm seeing is that Rhonda used the word language, but it almost seems like we're using different discourses about what happened. Well, to George Floyd, for example, or, you know, So I feel these two discourses are clashing. And I guess I wonder, is our role to find common ground, which I'm not sure we can, or is that we exist side by side? And I want to, you know, I get that we want to affirm the dignity of people with whom we disagree so vehemently, still working on that one. But I'm just curious how you think what's a way to navigate that? So for example, in a classroom, right? So I'm teaching a college class, the teaching of writing in the fall. Let's say I have a student who sees this, who is actually married to a police officer. So one of my students was married to a police officer, for example. So I guess I'm curious, like in the moment, and I know you teach that, in the moment, how, is it a common ground thing, or is it a we exist side by side thing? I know both and intellectually, but I'm not sure how it works on the ground. Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. It's a great question. So, you know, research helps here. There's a whole deep body of research that we mostly are honored by forgetting, having to do with the value of just bringing people together in, sort of sophisticated ways, right? The contact thesis or hypothesis, and the research that confirms the value of bringing people together from different backgrounds with under certain conditions, and often over time, but how the being together, everything comes back to being in a certain kind of way of thinking about praxis and practice. Bringing people together under certain circumstances can minimize the divide, right? But, and again, I'll point you toward the research without unpacking all of it here. Look up research around contact thesis or contact hypothesis, and you'll see, going back to the middle of last century, it was part of the research that helped us feel confident that desegregation could work, right? And has been affirmed as workable, as something that works, right? To desegregate the military, to bring women into settings where they have traditionally been barred, etc. So we've got some research that helps us with this. And yet it is something that for some reason we continue also to find ourselves being taught doesn't work. Like we're constantly being reminded how different we are, how divided. So we're in the process of constantly being, let's say, reformed for separation and for division. It's not just happening. It's not just we're just born in these silos. We are, again, in a context in which there is so much riding on the ideology of persistent division that we can't overcome. People's actual politics and life fortunes are tied to this. So it's not going to go down easily. So even though there's research and everyday life experience that shows that if you bring people together under certain circumstances, we can come to some greater understanding. I'm not going to say that we come to the same place and we stay there. It's a dynamic process. One of the teachers in my lineage, if you will, John Paul Lederach, a kind of a peacemaker among peacemakers, writing about, the moral imagination and what it takes to hang together over time is people with different points of view and so on and so forth. He talks about and writes about this as ongoing work, not just like we get into the same room, we stay there, and then we can look around and go shopping. No, like to come together across these radically different fields of experience is ongoing work. That's why we need these kinds of practices, for resilience, for staying with it, for realizing this is practice we do all our lives, we learn from all our lives. We will pass the baton when we're finished, and there will still be work to do. So it's shifting a lot, right, in terms of how we tend to hold these things. We want to measure efficacy at the end of the semester. Probably not. But we can begin to embed some of the practices through which we can support each other in staying with this through our lives. That's at least how I hold it. And I'm confident that we can do some of this because, again, there is some research that suggests that while we might not all come to a unity of perspective, we can come to some greater capacity to sort of be together in our differences. That's what it means to be human, and to be certainly in a democratic, multicultural society. It's how to be together in our differences with some respect, dignified, like commitment to dignity in our interactions. What I call public facing love, which is about, you know, seeing when somebody's actually being abused or mistreated and coming to some response together, even if we disagree with certain aspects of it. So, you know, and that's, I come to that kind of robustness of wanting to stick in there like that from law. Like that's what law is about. It's like, get in there, elbow each other around. But how do we do that in a way that says we're together trying to form a more perfect union? And it's not going to be perfect, but we're trying to form in practice. Thank you.
Appreciate that, Rhonda. Is Brother Srini still out there? There you go. Hey, man, I'm trying to do what you did last time, but not doing it as well. But you got this question on Ambedkar. Can you give us that one? Tell us about yourself and where you are and who you are and that kind of thing.
Sure. Thank you, Andre. Nice to see you, brother. My name is Srini Reddy. I graduated from Brown in 1998. I did my PhD at Berkeley in South Asian Studies. Then I went and worked in India for 6 years. And then Professor Roth invited me to teach in contemplative studies. So I owe everything to him. He was my teacher 25 years ago too. So he put me on the path a long time ago. And very nice to see Ram and Rhonda and Anne and Larson, who've been working really hard for all of these things, and Lynn and just all of you. Wonderful to see everyone. So here's my question. Ambedkar, I'll just read it out. Ambedkar supported reservation, which is similar to affirmative action, but stipulated that it should be done away with after some years. I forget the number of years. I think it was 15. But that has not happened. Reservation continues after 7 years of independence in India. And it's a highly contested policy with lots of issues related to it. Ram, since you know the background, what is your philosophical, I'm saying philosophical position on reservation in India and affirmative action in America?
I think it's always, it's kind of difficult to have this conversation, this space at the time we have. Mine is, my philosophical position is very much drawn from my own work, and Tom Weisskopf, the economist at Michigan, who wrote a book on reservation. He's an economist. What are the benefits of reservation and affirmative action? The social benefit of the affirmative action and reservation is definitely unquestionable. I mean, that's probably the most solid quantitative data you can show. So I think we should continue affirmative action, the affirmative action and reservation for a number of years. The number of honor killings, I mean, I've been studying that, and all caste-based discrimination, I'm studying that. I can give you tons of data how it's uneven, even the implementation is. So the numbers alone is not going to be, but of course it's a loaded question and very hotly debated question in India. So my position is Ambedkar would have said, it's not time. That's what he would say. I mean, if I have to say. I don't think we are there to really completely abolish that affirmative action reservation system in India. Reservation system in India is slightly, people who don't know, it's much stronger version of affirmative action because there's a guaranteed proportion of in political representation, in education, and in employment, all government employment. So this is important, but it's very unevenly implemented across the country. So the data is quite complex, and how you make cases for that is quite complex. But overall, based on my understanding, my data, my own research is, I think we should continue. It's too early to make a call.
All right, if we have time, I have a follow-up, but go ahead, Andre.
We do not have time, man. How about I'll come back to you, because Janet ceded her time so we could get to Jillian, and then we'll do Catherine and Ingrid, and then you can come back in, Srini, if we have time. Okay. All right, Jillian.
Srini always can email me. That's fine.
That's true too.
That's also true.
Jillian, you still out there? Yes, I see you. Hi, Jillian.
Okay. Hi, thank you. I'm a rising senior at Brown. My name is Jillian. I'm currently in New Jersey, and I've just personally been doing a lot of kind of like introspective anti-racism work recently, just like personal education, reading books, listening to podcasts, watching films, things like that. And it's been a lot of like internal work and having conversations with my family and things like that. And I'm wanting to kind of bring that more like external about like bringing about social change on a more like widespread like external social level. So I was wondering if you have any specific recommendations for how we could bring mindful awareness and mindful conversation around racism, white supremacy, and human dignity to the Brown student community when I get back to Brown in the fall.
Thank you, Jillian. Is that for Hal, Ram, or Rhonda, or myself?
Anybody who wants to answer.
Just quickly, we will join with you and our students in sponsoring further events like this. Hopefully, maybe bringing Ram and Rhonda back to campus, since we don't have to fly you in and you don't have to travel. I mean, there are some benefits to the situation, and I think to host more events of this nature, in which we talk about contemplation and social activism in a very practical way. Maybe that's the next step. Maybe we do a workshop surrounding that, where we deal with practices and then how to extend those practices into our work in the community. That may be the next step, and that's that might be good. I see people nodding, so I think that's Jillian, let's talk about this and work towards doing that as one step.
Ram, did you want to join in there?
Yeah, I think it's Jillian. The issue is always what I noticed is students actually don't have a clear vision. So it's important, as Hal said. I really first of all help students to develop a vision for it, what dignity means, all these things. So sometimes they're doing things they think that it's important and they're really with good intention, but a lot of times they're not even aware of their intention. So how to do it intentionally? And I think that's where the mindfulness, all those things will come. Yeah, like Hal said, it is series of workshop practices. So yeah, there are a lot of tools available, so we can talk about it.
And to an earlier point Ram made, I think it was in his lecture, you know, this question of intersectional identities is important. So we got to consider class, we got to consider, you know, trans and lesbians and gay folks.
Absolutely.
Also, and then there's the environment. I mean, there's a lot of ways in which these questions can be expanded and extended too. But Jillian, I look forward to doing whatever I can in to work with you and your student cohort to support. And thank you for being here. Catherine, are you still out there? Hey, tell us about yourself or share something in your question.
Sure. Thank you so much. Yes, so I am a social worker, clinical social worker at the local hospital, Rhode Island Hospital, and I am just really so honored to be here to hear from all of you. As I said in my chat, I think fall squarely in the progressive group that is referred to in Robin DiAngelo's White Fragility book, if you're familiar with that. You know, someone going into what happened with George Floyd, thinking that I was awake to social justice and racial inequality, and you know, with my list of I did this, that, and the other thing, and then really kind of realizing that it's not enough not to be a racist, it's about being an anti-racist, and how am I going to make that a genuine part of every day moving forward. And I am new to teaching mindfulness in addition to my clinical practice here at the hospital. And so grateful for how Rhonda, your work, and also Ruth King I have been reading. So incredibly grateful for your work of connecting what I have been learning about mindfulness in my practice to the work of racial justice. I sort of, with a lot of put myself out there with a lot of uncertainty, and gathered up a group of about 40 colleagues to set about this work, thinking, and then was like, okay, okay, let's go. And then was, you know, so grateful to have just this, I have these tools, I have mindfulness, this practice that is really gonna be helpful for me, and then also those that I'm trying to do the work with. So my question is a little bit more about, as I move into teaching mindfulness, is there a place, what is the place for bringing this piece, the social justice piece, into the teaching of mindfulness? And I know in the MBSR curriculum, there's this piece around communication, and I'm trying to think, I'm not actively teaching right now, so I'm trying to think. I know, Rhonda, you're familiar with that, and I don't expect you to get to come to super detail, but I'm just thinking about how this fits into the role of teachers of mindfulness.
Thanks, Catherine. Appreciate your work, and you on the front lines as a social worker, my God. Anyway, Rhonda, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you so much, Catherine. It's an honor to be in this conversation with you, my dear, and to hear about your, you know, long and deep commitment to this work, and that you're still in it with, just like all of us, right? So again, that kind of humility of like, we're all in this together, I think is a really important stance for anything we do here, and that we're always learning and creating places where that can be true, right? Which disrupts a lot of the teacher-student dynamic that runs through conventional teaching spaces, right? So how you can both be a facilitator and a guide and something of a teacher, and also know you have some things to learn, we always do, and be ready to repair when we make a mistake, because we always will, that happens. So there are ways to generally think about what it takes for us to step in, right, with that kind of, that heartfulness that says, I will help, I will do what I can to create a space where we can work on this. There's a certain way of like being present to our own ongoing work. That's, I think, really, really an important foundation. I wrote an article that Professor Willis, Andre was beautiful enough to reference, called Teaching Mindfulness with Mindfulness of Diversity, which exactly goes to this question, right? Teaching mindfulness with mindfulness of diversity was one approximation of a way of thinking about how you can start having our work in anti-racism inform our work in teaching mindfulness. I wrote another chapter in a book on Buddhism and whiteness, which is about taking and making refuge in racial and whiteness awareness work. It's really looking at how we create spaces where we can do this with a robust commitment to both the mindfulness practice piece and seeing this as fully about mindfulness practice, even as we try and disrupt these patterns of oppression as they show up in these classrooms and in these meditation spaces, et cetera, et cetera. So those two pieces of writing are pieces that I would point you to, in addition to obviously the book, as we've mentioned. Bhikkhu Analayo, who's a teacher of well-known repute, many of you may know this teacher, Analayo, Analayo, just published a book called, an article called Confronting Racism with Mindfulness. Okay. So, you know, the resources are showing up for us just when we're ready for them, thank goodness, right? There are more and more resources out there, and we're doing it. You know, it is being done. And in terms of, I mean, you use the language of MBSR. I know Lynn and others will say, we might, if we're gonna alter MBSR's curriculum, as I did at my law school when I started offering it to law students, I started calling it an MBS, a mindfulness-based intervention, not MBSR, because it's different. But you can definitely, as I did both, you know, for lawyers generally, law students generally, to deal with what it might be required to do the work that they do long term, which is fierce, but also for law students working with racism and white supremacy, using MBSR's teaching, but into changing them a bit so that we can do this is a new intervention then. So we want to be mindful of the fact if we're changing MBSR that we name it as not necessarily being just for, you know, MBSR in that traditional sense. But we're doing, it's being done, Catherine, you're on the right path, you're not alone. Ruth King is offering a supportive community of practice for folks doing this. It's something that I'm probably going to offer in the next year or so too, so kind of stay tuned. The places where we can at least meet once a month in some kind of way of knowing that we're working at this and we're bringing our questions and we're on an arc of development together. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
I want to honor the time, but just try to get in this last question from Ingrid. Ingrid, are you still out there?
Yes, I'm here.
Hey, Ingrid.
Hey.
Can you, if you'd like, share something for us quickly, and then share your question with us.
Okay. So I'm a high school teacher here in Providence, and I'm so energized and thankful for all your work. And it really started firing off in my brain, thinking about how important dignity is. And I'd be so interested in hear what Rhonda and Ram have to say about how to help develop dignity in and for high school students, where, you know, there's this perhaps sensitive age issue, but in my opinion, maybe not.
Thank you. Yeah, Ram.
Okay. I've done work with teenagers, and one of the things, couple of things would be useful to start with. Sometimes it's easy. It's not easy for them to understand dignity, but when you talk to them, when dignity injuries, when you feel your dignities are violated, then people can generate more instances of that. So I actually start from there. So you can actually start with students, so they can do a journaling. I ask students about journaling, or they do a photo voice. They actually take photos to explain it. Then we do a discussion in the classroom about this. Then you realize how each of them have a different sense of how they think about it. The phenomenology itself is very interesting. So that'll be a very good place to start. And the journaling, some of the journaling prompts are also in my website. If you go to my website, you can download it. It's a PDF file for the mindful mindset. You can also use that to really talk about it. So first of all, ask what dignity means to them and the dignity injuries. You'll be surprised what people write about it and what photos they take. That's always, it's fun to work with teenagers with that idea.
Rhonda, do you want to take us home on this question, or should we just go straight to you, Hal?
I think just in the interest of time, I don't want to keep people longer than too much longer than we've already set aside, and I don't want to put upon our visiting speakers too much. So I'd like to ask Rhonda to take us out with a meditation, maybe 5-minute meditation. Rhonda, do you want me to ring us in and ring us out? Don't leave home without it. Oh, of course, we're not leaving home these days, but anyway.
Right, I'm happy to ring us in. So just to say, first and foremost, thank you. Deep gratitude in my heart for all of you who've shown up in the ways that you have, whether you spoke or not. Your presence has mattered. Your being here matters much more than we can say, much more than we probably know. So from that place of naming a sense of gratitude, that can be a doorway into kind of a softening of the heart, a restoration of the spirit, inviting us all in our own ways to just settle into this space just a little bit more deeply. And I'm going to ring the bell and do some light guiding to support us in coming home to this moment in a way that hopefully will resonate with us throughout our day and maybe in some ways much longer. So perhaps taking just a few deeper than usual breaths, or in whatever way is comfortable for you in this moment, inviting a kind of turning toward the sense of being here, being supported, not being alone. So as you breathe in and out, you might just bring your attention for a moment or two to the sensations of the ground beneath us, beneath your feet in this moment. Maybe the points of contact between the buttocks and the chair. And as you do so, sensing into the reality that we're all touching this one good earth in this moment. As we breathe in and out, resting in the sensations of being alive here and being alive here together. So feeling kind of compassion or kindness toward whatever is coming up for you, whether it's some degree of difficulty with the topics we've been talking about, or some aspect of pain and suffering around these issues that is particular to you in this moment. See if you can bring the will to alleviate your own suffering, your own loving, kind heart right into this moment with the intention of helping create or helping touch into the resources you carry for shifting into a deeper well-being for yourself right now. Breathing in and out with kindness. From this place, as you breathe in, sensing into what is well within you now, as best you can. The quality of your own loving heart. Perhaps in the next out breath, imagine extending the wish for well-being to everyone on this call. Imagining your loving intentionality, the desire you feel for a better, safer, more healed world. As you breathe in, sensing into what's true in your own heart around this, breathing out, the offering that is your life to each and all of us on this call. So as you breathe in, next, see if you can feel, in some sense, receive the wish for well-being that is now being called forth, and let's say we can be confident it is flowing here between all of us who are present, this wish for mutual well-being. And so from this place of really sensing into what brought us together in this call, some way of mutually holding a wish for our healing and a will to practice in ways that would promote it. Now, if we can extend this sense of what we are feeling and what we are here for into an offering to those who are suffering in our communities, near and far, around the world, near and far, the least among us, those who are laboring in those invisible but difficult, dirty jobs, those who consider themselves to be laboring on high, with the conceit that they are above any of this suffering. The invitation is to see if we can expand the sense of our compassionate holding so that it encompasses everyone as best we can. So as we bring this meditation to a close, the invitation is to sense into maybe one word that captures something that's alive in you now that you might want to carry forward from this engagement. One insight, one feeling. Knowing that we're not alone and we continue to be together in some sense, even as we part. I send you the wish for well-being. May you be filled with loving kindness. May you be well in body and in mind. May you be safe from inner and outer dangers. May we each and all be truly easeful, liberated, connected, resourced, free.
Thank you so much, Rhonda, Ram, Andre, and Srini, and thank all of you for joining us. Please stay tuned. Come back to the Contemplative Studies website. If you're not yet on the listserv, there's a button that you can click to join the listserv, and stay tuned for more programs coming up in the next 3-semester academic year. So I wish you all peace and safety and love.